I'm Kendall Harper, 29, 7 months pregnant, and still reeling from losing my husband David in a car accident 3 weeks ago. While I was drowning in grief and trying to figure out how to raise our daughter alone, David's best friend Marcus showed up at my door with a manila envelope and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry for your loss, Kendall," he said, "but David owed me $50,000 and I need it back." The betrayal hit me like a second wave of devastation, not just the money, but the timing, the coldness, the complete disregard for my condition. But as I dug deeper into David's finances and Marcus's claims, I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my husband's death, our marriage, and the man I trusted as family. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt vulnerable and taken advantage of in your darkest moment, like this video for stories of truth, justice, and finding strength when everything seems lost. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood beside David's casket in a black dress that barely fit over my growing belly, watching as person after person offered their condolences. The funeral home felt suffocating, filled with the scent of lily and the weight of unspoken grief. David looked peaceful in his dark suit, his hands folded across his chest, but something was missing: his wedding ring. "Where's his ring?" I whispered to the funeral director, my voice barely audible above the soft organ music. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper. We only received what was provided by the coroner's office. Perhaps it was lost in the accident." The accident. Those words still felt foreign, impossible. David had been driving home from work on a Tuesday evening, the same route he'd taken 1,000 times. A single-car collision with a tree on Maple Road. No witnesses, no explanation for why he'd swerved off the road. The police said he might have fallen asleep at the wheel, but David never fell asleep driving. He was too careful, too responsible. Marcus had been one of the first to arrive at the funeral home that morning, wearing an expensive black suit I'd never seen before. He'd hugged me with what felt like genuine emotion, his voice breaking as he told me how sorry he was. "David was like a brother to me," he'd said, his eyes glistening with tears. "If there's anything at all you need, you just call me, okay?" I'd been grateful for his presence then. Marcus and David had been friends since college, and seeing him there felt like having a piece of David's life still intact. But now, thinking back, I remembered the way he'd lingered near the casket, the way he'd asked detailed questions about David's final days, about our finances, about whether David had mentioned any business deals or investments. At the time, I'd attributed his questions to grief, to the natural desire to understand what had happened to his best friend. People processed loss differently, I told myself. Some people needed to talk through every detail, to make sense of the senseless, but there had been something else, something that nagged at me, even in my fog of grief. Marcus had been overly interested in David's work computer, asking if I'd found any important documents, any passwords I might need help with. He'd even offered to help me sort through David's papers, to handle the business side of things, so I could focus on preparing for the baby. I declined his offer, wanting to handle David's affairs myself, but Marcus had persisted. "You're 7 months pregnant, Kendall. You shouldn't be stressing about paperwork and financial stuff. Let me help you." Now, as I held the manila envelope he'd brought to my door, I wondered what kind of help he'd really been offering. The papers inside were loan documents, signed in David's name, dated just 6 months ago, but David's signature looked different somehow. More hurried, less careful than his usual precise handwriting. The funeral felt like a lifetime ago, but the memory of Marcus's behavior that day now took on a darker meaning. He hadn't just been grieving, he'd been planning. After Marcus left, I spent the rest of the evening poring over our financial records, something I'd been avoiding since David's death. The dining room table became my command center, covered with bank statements, insurance papers, and bill notices that had been piling up for weeks. My laptop hummed beside me as I logged into our joint accounts, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed to blur together through my tears. David had always handled our finances. Not because I couldn't. I had a business degree and worked in marketing before taking maternity leave, but because he genuinely enjoyed it. He'd sit at this same table every Sunday morning with his coffee, organizing receipts and updating our budget spreadsheet. "We're doing good, babe," he'd always say, showing me the neat columns of income and expenses. "Baby Harper's going to be well taken care of." But now, looking at our bank statements from the past 6 months, I saw a pattern that made my stomach clench. Large withdrawals, each one for several $1,000s, with notations I didn't recognize. Transfer to MR appeared 5 times, totaling $37,000. A Marcus Reed. My hands shook as I scrolled through the online banking records. The transfers had started in February, just after we'd announced the pregnancy to our families. David had been so excited that day, calling his parents and then Marcus to share the news. I remembered David's side of the phone conversation. "We're going to need you to be the best uncle ever, man. This kid's going to need all the family she can get." Family, that's what Marcus had been to us, or so I'd thought. Each transfer was substantial. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. The largest was $12,000, withdrawn just 2 weeks before David's accident. The memo line read, "Emergency loan MR personal matter." I grabbed my phone and called our bank, navigating through the automated system until I reached the human being. "Mrs. Harper, I'm so sorry for your loss," the customer service representative said after I explained who I was. "How can I help you today?" "I need to understand some transactions from our joint account. Large transfers to someone with the initials. Emma, my husband, made these transfers, but I don't have any documentation about them. Let me pull up your account." I could hear typing on the other end. "I see the transfers you're referring to. They were all initiated online using your husband's login credentials. The receiving account belongs to Marcus Reed. Is this someone you know?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yes, he was my husband's friend. But I don't understand why David would be transferring so much money to him." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper, but I don't have any additional information about the purpose of these transfers. They appear to be legitimate transactions made with proper authorization." After hanging up, I sat in silence, my baby moving restlessly inside me as if sensing my distress. $37,000. That was nearly half of our savings, money we'd been setting aside for the baby's arrival and my unpaid maternity leave. Money that was supposed to keep us afloat for the first few months of our daughter's life. I thought about Marcus's visit earlier, his claims about a $50,000 debt. If David had already given him $37,000, that would mean Marcus was demanding another $13,000 on top of what he'd already received. But why would David have borrowed $50,000 from Marcus in the first place? And why hadn't he told me about it? The loan documents in Marcus's envelope were dated March 15th, but the bank transfers had started in February. Something didn't add up. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing between memories of David and Marcus's friendship and the disturbing financial discoveries. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face on our wedding day, grinning as he introduced Marcus as his best man. "This guy's been my brother since freshman year," David had said, his arm around Marcus's shoulders. "I wouldn't be the man I am today without him." That had been 3 years ago, and it was true. Marcus had been woven into the fabric of our relationship from the beginning. He'd been David's roommate in college, his groomsman, the friend who helped us move into our first apartment. When David got his job at the consulting firm, Marcus had been the one to celebrate with us, taking us out for an expensive dinner and picking up the entire check. "You deserve this, man," Marcus had said that night, raising his glass of wine. "You've worked harder than anyone I know. This is just the beginning." Marcus had always been generous with money, quicker to grab the check than any of our other friends. He worked in real estate development, and while I'd never understood the specifics of his business, he'd always seemed to be doing well. He drove a BMW, lived in a downtown condo, and took expensive vacations. David had sometimes made jokes about Marcus's lifestyle, calling him Mr. Moneybags, with affection. But in the past year, something had changed. Marcus had started asking David for small favors, rides to the airport, help moving some furniture, occasional small loans that he'd always paid back promptly. David had never mentioned any large sums of money, certainly nothing approaching $50,000. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, scrolling through David's contacts until I found Marcus's number. Without thinking, I pressed call, needing to hear his voice, to demand answers. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Marcus, it's Kendall. I need to talk to you about those bank transfers. David gave you $37,000 over the past 6 months. I don't understand why, and I need you to explain what's going on. Call me back. After hanging up, I realized I needed to find David's work phone. The police had returned his personal belongings after the accident, but I'd been too distraught to go through them thoroughly. I made my way to our bedroom closet, where I'd placed the plastic bag containing David's wallet, keys, and phone. David's iPhone was cracked but functional. I'd avoided turning it on, afraid of seeing his last text messages, his final calls. But now I needed to know what he'd been thinking, what he'd been planning. I plugged it in and waited for it to boot up. The lock screen showed 3 missed calls from Marcus on the day of the accident, all within an hour of David's death. The last call was timestamped at 6:47 p.m. The accident had occurred at 7:15 p.m. My hands trembled as I entered David's passcode, our anniversary date. The phone unlocked, revealing a flurry of text messages from the weeks before his death. Most were routine work colleagues, family members, automated alerts from his bank. But there was a thread with Marcus that made my blood run cold. The messages started 3 days before the accident. Marcus, we need to talk. This can't wait anymore. David, I told you I need more time. Kendall's due in 2 months. Marcus, time's up, David. I'm sorry, but I can't protect you anymore. David, protect me from what? I thought we were friends. Marcus, we are friends. That's why I'm giving you 48 hours to figure this out. David, Marcus, please. Just tell me what's really going on. The last message was from Marcus, sent the morning of David's accident. Meet me at the usual place. 7 p.m. Don't be late. I stared at the phone screen, my baby kicking urgently as my stress levels spiked. The usual place, where was that? And what had Marcus meant about protecting David? From what? From whom? There were no messages from David after that final text from Marcus. No response, no confirmation that he'd received the message. But David had been driving toward downtown when he'd crashed, not toward our home from his office. He'd been going to meet Marcus. The next morning, I called David's life insurance company, my hands shaking as I dialed the number on the policy documents. I'd been putting off this conversation for weeks, unable to face the reality of filing a claim. The idea of profiting from David's death felt wrong, even though I knew we'd need the money for our daughter's future. Great Northern Life Insurance, this is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you? Hi, this is Kendall Harper. I need to inquire about a life insurance policy for my husband, David Harper. He passed away 3 weeks ago. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Harper. Let me pull up that policy for you. After a moment of typing, she continued, I have the policy here. It looks like we actually received a claim on this policy already. Let me just verify, are you calling about policy number 447891236? My stomach dropped. Yes, that's the policy number. But I haven't filed a claim yet. Who filed it? Let me check the details. More typing. The claim was filed by Marcus Reed on behalf of the estate. He listed himself as the secondary beneficiary and provided documentation showing that he was authorized to act on behalf of the primary beneficiary. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising. I'm the primary beneficiary. I'm David's wife. Mrs. Harper, I'm going to need to transfer you to our claims department. This is definitely something that needs to be resolved immediately. 20 minutes later, after being transferred 3 times and explaining the situation repeatedly, I was connected to a claims investigator named Robert Chun. His voice was professional but concerned as he reviewed the file. Mrs. Harper, this is highly unusual. The documentation provided by Mr. Reed appeared legitimate. He had copies of the death certificate, policy information, and what appeared to be a power of attorney document. But looking at our records, you're clearly listed as the primary beneficiary. How much is the policy worth? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. The policy is for $250,000. Mr. Reed has requested that the funds be directed to an account he controls, claiming that there are outstanding debts that need to be settled before any funds can be distributed to you. $250,000. That was significantly more than I'd remembered. When David had first taken out the policy 5 years ago, it had been for $100,000. He must have increased it without telling me. Mr. Chun, I need to know exactly what documents Marcus Reed provided to your company. This man has been making false claims about debts my husband allegedly owed him. I can email you copies of everything we have on file, but Mrs. Harper, I need to warn you that we're going to have to freeze this claim until we can verify the legitimacy of Mr. Reed's documentation. This could take several weeks. After hanging up, I sat in David's home office, staring at the insurance policy documents spread across his desk. David had been meticulous about keeping records, filing everything in labeled folders, but as I searched through his files, I couldn't find any record of increasing the life insurance policy or any documentation about a power attorney for Marcus. What I did find was a letter from David's employer, dated 2 weeks before his death, confirming his promotion to senior partner. The letter mentioned a significant salary increase and a substantial bonus that would be paid out in quarterly installments. David had been excited about this promotion. He'd mentioned it briefly, but said he wanted to surprise me with the details after the baby was born. But if David was getting a promotion and a raise, why would he need to borrow money from Marcus? And why would he increase his life insurance policy without telling me? I opened David's laptop and began searching through his email folders. Most were work-related, but there was a folder labeled Personal Confidential that I'd never seen before. Inside were emails with Marcus dating back 6 months, and the tone was very different from their usual casual friendship exchanges. The first email was from Marcus, dated 4 months ago. David, I need your help. I'm in serious trouble and you're the only person I can trust. Can we meet this week? David's response was immediate. Of course. Whatever you need, man. We'll figure it out. But as I read through the email chain, it became clear that Marcus's problems were far more serious than I'd imagined. He'd made bad investments, borrowed money from the wrong people, and was now facing threats if he didn't pay back what he owed. The final email in the chain was from David, sent just 3 days before his death. Marcus, I've given you everything I can. I can't put my family at risk anymore. We need to find another solution. Marcus's response was chilling. There is no other solution. David, you got us into this mess, and you're going to help me get out of it. That's what friends do. The next day, I drove to David's office building, my pregnant belly making it difficult to get comfortable behind the wheel. I hadn't been there since his funeral, and walking through the familiar glass doors felt surreal. The receptionist, Maria, recognized me immediately and offered her condolences again, her eyes soft with genuine sympathy. Mrs. Harper, it's so good to see you. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said, though that felt like an overstatement. I was wondering if I could speak with someone about David's work computer. There might be some personal files I need to access. Of course. Let me get Tom Bradley for you. He was David's closest colleague. Tom appeared within minutes, a tall man in his 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been at David's funeral, but we'd only exchanged brief pleasantries. Now, he seemed genuinely concerned as he led me to a small conference room. Kendall, I'm so sorry we haven't reached out more. We've all been struggling with David's loss. He was the heart of this place. Thank you, Tom. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Did David seem different in his final weeks? Stressed about anything outside of work? Tom's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, yes. David had been distracted for about a month before the accident. He was still doing excellent work, but he seemed worried about something. He'd get phone calls that would upset him, and he started working late more often. Did he mention anyone named Marcus Reed? Tom's face darkened. Marcus, yes, that name came up several times. David never gave me details, but I got the impression Marcus was in some kind of financial trouble. David mentioned lending him money, and it seemed like it was becoming a problem. My heart raced. What kind of problem? David said Marcus had gotten involved with some questionable people. Investors, I think, but not the legitimate kind. David was worried that Marcus was in over his head. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. The day before the accident, David asked me about asset protection, how to shield personal wealth from creditors or legal claims. He seemed really scared, Kendall. Did he say why he was scared? He said Marcus had made some threats. Not physical threats, but financial ones. Something about how if Marcus went down, he'd make sure David went down with him. Tom led me to David's office, which had been left untouched since his death. His computer was still there, password protected, but accessible with his employee credentials that Tom provided. As I scrolled through David's files, I found a folder labeled Personal Emergency. Buried deep in his directory structure inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Screenshots of threatening text messages from unknown numbers, bank records showing Marcus's failing real estate business, and most disturbing of all, a detailed timeline David had created, tracking Marcus's increasingly desperate behavior and escalating demands for money. One document was titled Insurance Policy Changes and contained notes about Marcus pressuring David to increase his life insurance and add Marcus as a beneficiary. David had written, "Insist this is temporary, just until he can get back on his feet. Says it's the only way to protect Kendall and the baby if something happens to me. But something feels wrong about this." The final entry in David's timeline was dated the day of his death. Meeting M tonight. He says he has a solution that will make everything go away. I don't trust him anymore, but I have to try for Kendall's sake. If something happens to me, the truth is in this folder. Tom read over my shoulder, his face pale. Kendall, this looks like David was being blackmailed, but blackmailed about what? David was the most honest person I knew. Maybe that's exactly why Marcus targeted him. Good people make the best victims because they'll do anything to protect the people they love. That afternoon, I drove to the police station with David's computer files, printed out in a manila folder of my own. Officer Sarah Martinez, who had handled David's accident report, agreed to meet with me despite her busy schedule. She was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Harper, I remember your husband's case. Single vehicle accident on Maple Road. I'm sorry for your loss. What can I help you with today?" I spread David's documents across her desk, explaining everything I'd discovered about Marcus, the financial transfers, and the threatening messages. Officer Martinez listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Harper, these are serious allegations. But I need to be honest with you. Your husband's accident was investigated thoroughly. There was no evidence of foul play. But did you know he was supposed to meet Marcus Reed that night? Did you know about the financial pressure he was under?" Officer Martinez pulled out a thick file folder. "Let me review the details with you. The accident occurred at 7:15 p.m. on Maple Road, approximately 2 miles from the downtown area. Your husband's vehicle left the roadway and struck a large oak tree. The damage patterns were consistent with a high-speed impact." She showed me photographs from the scene that made my stomach lurch. David's car was crumpled beyond recognition, the driver's side completely crushed. The initial investigation suggested he may have fallen asleep at the wheel or suffered some kind of medical emergency. There were no skid marks indicating he tried to brake or avoid the tree. What about witnesses? Was there anyone else on the road? Actually, yes. There was one witness, a jogger who was running on the path parallel to Maple Road. She reported seeing your husband's car driving erratically for several hundred yards before the impact. She said it looked like he was swerving, as if he was trying to avoid something in the road. My heart skipped. Avoid something? Like what? The witness wasn't sure. She was about a quarter-mile away when it happened. But she said it definitely didn't look like he'd fallen asleep. She described it as deliberate swerving, like he was trying to dodge an obstacle. Officer Martinez flipped through more pages. Here's something interesting that I didn't think much of at the time. When we processed the scene, we found your husband's cell phone had been thrown from the vehicle. It was found about 30 feet from the car, and it had been turned off. Turned off? David never turned off his phone. That's what struck us as odd. Most people in accidents don't have time to turn off their phones. But we assumed it happened during the impact. Maybe the power button got pressed. She pulled out an evidence bag containing David's wedding ring. We also found this at the scene, but not on your husband's finger. It was on the passenger seat, as if he'd taken it off deliberately. The sight of David's ring made tears spring to my eyes. It was a simple gold band, but inside was engraved with our wedding date and the words, "Forever yours." David had never taken it off, not even to shower or sleep. Officer Martinez, I think Marcus Reed was there that night. I think he was supposed to meet David, and something went wrong. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Harper. Do you have any evidence placing Mr. Reed at the scene? I thought about the text messages, the meeting David was supposed to attend. David's phone shows Marcus asked him to meet at the usual place at 7 p.m. David was driving toward downtown when he crashed. He wouldn't have been on Maple Road unless he was going to meet someone. Officer Martinez made more notes. I'm going to need to re-interview the witness and review the physical evidence again. If what you're telling me is true, this changes the nature of the investigation significantly. There's something else, I said, pulling out the insurance documents Tom had helped me print. Marcus Reed filed a claim on David's life insurance policy, claiming to be a beneficiary. He also says David owed him $50,000, but I found evidence that David had already given him $37,000 in cash transfers. Mrs. Harper, this is starting to look like fraud at minimum, possibly much worse. I need you to file a formal complaint about the insurance claim, and I'm going to reopen your husband's accident case. But I have to warn you, if Marcus Reed is as dangerous as these documents suggest, you could be putting yourself at risk by pursuing this. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling my daughter move restlessly inside me. Officer Martinez, my husband died trying to protect us from this. Man, I won't let Marcus destroy what David died for. Officer Martinez's investigation moved quickly. Within 2 days, she called me with disturbing news about Marcus's background that David had never known. I was folding baby clothes in the nursery when my phone rang, trying to focus on something positive and hopeful for my daughter's arrival. Mrs. Harper, I've been digging into Marcus Reed's financial situation, and what I found is worse than we thought. He's not just in debt. He's been running a sophisticated fraud operation for the past 2 years. I sank into the rocking chair. David had assembled just last month. What kind of fraud? Real estate investment scams. He's been taking money from investors for property developments that don't exist. The FBI has an open investigation, and they estimate he's stolen over $2 million from at least 15 victims. My hands trembled as I processed this information. So David was just another victim? It's more complicated than that. Marcus needed legitimate business partners to make his schemes look credible. Your husband's consulting firm, his clean reputation, his financial stability. Marcus used all of that to gain credibility with investors. David may not have known the full extent, but Marcus was definitely using him. Officer Martinez paused. And I could hear papers rustling. There's something else. We tracked down some of Marcus's victims, and several of them mentioned receiving threatening phone calls when they started asking questions about their investments. The threats always came from different numbers, but the pattern was consistent: pay up or face consequences. What kind of consequences? Vandalism, harassment. In one case, a suspicious break-in where nothing was stolen, but the victim's financial documents were gone through. Mrs. Harper, I think Marcus has been using intimidation tactics for months, possibly longer. That evening, I was going through more of David's papers when I found a small key taped to the inside of his desk drawer. It looked like a safety deposit box key, but I'd never known David to have one. The attached tag had only a number, 247. The next morning, I called our bank again. Mrs. Harper, yes, your husband did have a safety deposit box with us. Box 247, you're listed as a co-holder, so you have full access. An hour later, I was sitting in the bank's safety deposit box room, staring at contents that painted a terrifying picture of my husband's final months. David had been building a case against Marcus, collecting evidence of the fraud schemes, documenting every threatening phone call and intimidating encounter. There were printed emails from Marcus's other victims, copies of fake investment contracts, and detailed financial records showing how Marcus had been siphoning money from his business accounts. But most shocking of all was a handwritten letter from David, dated just 1 week before his death. Kendall, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Marcus is probably trying to claim money from our accounts or my insurance. Don't believe anything he tells you. I've been trying to help him because I thought he was in trouble, but I've discovered he's been lying about everything. The money I gave him wasn't for gambling debts. It was blackmail. He threatened to implicate me in his fraud schemes if I didn't pay him. I never did anything illegal, but he's manipulated documents to make it look like I was involved. I've been working with the FBI to expose him, but I'm scared of what he might do if he finds out. I love you and our daughter more than life itself. Don't let him hurt our family. Attached to the letter were copies of correspondence between David and FBI agent Rebecca Torres. David had been a confidential informant, helping the FBI build their case against Marcus by recording their conversations and providing evidence of the blackmail attempts. The final document in the box was a manila envelope marked for FBI agent Torres urgent. Inside was a flash drive and a note, complete recordings of all conversations with Marcus Reed, including his confession to threatening other victims and his plan to fake his own death to escape prosecution. My hands shook as I read David's final note on the envelope. If something happens to me before I can deliver this to Agent Torres, Marcus Reed is responsible. He's threatened to make my death look like an accident if I don't continue paying him. I pray Kendall never has to read this, but if she does, please know that I tried to protect our family the only way I knew how. I immediately called Officer Martinez from the bank's parking lot. Officer Martinez, I found David's safety deposit box. He was working with the FBI, and he knew Marcus was planning to kill him. Mrs. Harper, where are you right now? First National Bank on Elm Street. Stay exactly where you are. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere else. I'm sending a patrol car to escort you to the FBI field office. Agent Torres has been waiting to talk to you. As I sat in my car waiting for the police escort, Marcus's words from 3 days ago echoed in my mind. David owed me $50,000, and I need it back. It wasn't a debt collection, it was theft. He was trying to steal money from my husband's widow and unborn child. Money that David had died trying to protect. But now I had the evidence David had died for. The truth was finally coming to light. FBI agent Rebecca Torres was nothing like I'd expected. She was petite and soft-spoken, with grey-streaked hair and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. When Officer Martinez escorted me into her office at the federal building, Agent Torres stood immediately and offered me a chair with genuine concern. Mrs. Harper, I'm so sorry for your loss. David was a brave man. He was trying to do the right thing in a very dangerous situation. Agent Torres, I need to know what really happened to my husband. Was he murdered? She opened a thick file folder and pulled out several photographs. Mrs. Harper, your husband came to us 6 weeks before his death. He discovered that Marcus Reed was using his name and business connections to legitimize fraudulent investment schemes. When David tried to end their friendship, Marcus began blackmailing him. Agent Torres showed me copies of documents I recognized from David's safety deposit box. Marcus had forged your husband's signature on several investment contracts, making it appear that David was a partner in the fraudulent schemes. He threatened to turn these over to law enforcement and claimed David was the mastermind if David didn't continue providing financial support. But David was innocent. He was helping you catch Marcus. Absolutely. Your husband was completely innocent, but Marcus had created enough false evidence to destroy David's reputation and career. David felt trapped. He couldn't expose Marcus without risking his own prosecution, at least initially. Agent Torres pulled out a small recording device. Your husband was wearing a wire during his final meeting with Marcus. We have everything on tape. My heart hammered as she pressed play. David's voice came through clearly, nervous but determined. Marcus, this has to stop. I've given you everything I can, and Kendall's about to have our baby. I can't keep living like this. Marcus's response was cold and calculating. You can't stop now, David. We're partners in this, remember? If I go down, I'm taking you with me. Your wife, your kid, they'll grow up knowing their father was a criminal. I never did anything illegal, and you know it. Doesn't matter what I know. Matters what I can prove. And I've got enough documentation to bury you. There was a long pause before David's voice returned, stronger now. What do you want, Marcus? What will it take to end this? I need you to increase your life insurance policy and add me as the beneficiary, just temporarily, until I can disappear and start over somewhere new. You're planning to fake your death? Something like that. Look, David, you help me with this one last thing and I'll disappear forever. You'll never hear from me again. And if I refuse, Marcus's laugh was chilling. You won't refuse. Because if you do, I'll make sure your death looks like an accident. Car accidents happen all the time, especially to people under a lot of stress. The recording continued for several more minutes, with Marcus detailing his plan to escape prosecution by faking his own death and starting a new life with money from David's life insurance policy. David agreed to everything, but his voice carried a resignation that broke my heart. Agent Torres stopped the recording. This conversation took place 3 days before your husband's death. We had planned to arrest Marcus the following week, but David insisted on one final meeting to get a confession about the threats against other victims. So David went to that meeting knowing it was dangerous. Yes, that we had surveillance teams in place. Unfortunately, Marcus was more paranoid than we anticipated. He spotted our vehicles and changed the meeting location at the last minute. By the time we tracked them to Maple Road, it was too late. Agent Torres pulled out crime scene photos that made me look away. The accident scene was staged, Mrs. Harper. Marcus forced your husband's car off the road, then manipulated the scene to make it look like a single-vehicle accident. We found Marcus's tire tracks at the scene, and paint transfer from his BMW on your husband's car. Why didn't you arrest him immediately? We tried, but Marcus had prepared for this possibility. He had an alibi, multiple witnesses placing him at a restaurant across town at the time of the accident. It took us time to prove those witnesses were paid to lie. Agent Torres leaned forward, her expression grave. Mrs. Harper, Marcus Reed is extremely dangerous, and he's getting desperate. His fake alibi is falling apart. His victims are coming forward, and his financial empire is collapsing. When he approached you about that fake debt, he was making one last attempt to steal money before fleeing the country. What happens now? We're going to arrest him, but we need your help. Marcus doesn't know that we have your husband's recordings or that you've discovered the truth about his schemes. We want to arrange a meeting where he'll confess to the murder, and we need you to wear a wire. The thought of facing Marcus again, knowing what he'd done to David, made me feel sick. But I thought about my daughter, about the life David had. Died trying to protect. Agent Torres, what do I need to do? The plan was set for the following evening. Agent Torres and her team spent hours preparing me for the confrontation with Marcus, coaching me on what to say and how to respond to his likely reactions. The wire I'd be wearing was barely visible, a tiny device sewn into the fabric of my maternity sweater. Remember, Mrs. Harper, your goal is to get him talking about David's death and the insurance fraud. Don't push too hard, let him volunteer information. Men like Marcus enjoy bragging about their schemes when they think they're in control. I was terrified, but also determined. David had died trying to gather evidence against Marcus. Now it was my turn to finish what my husband had started. That afternoon, I called Marcus from my home phone, knowing the FBI was recording every word. My hands shook as I dialed his number, but my voice remained steady. Marcus, it's Kendall. I've been thinking about what you said, about David owing you money. Kendall, thank God you called. I've been worried about you. This whole situation is just terrible timing, with the baby coming and everything. I want to pay you what David owed, but I need to understand exactly what happened. Can we meet tonight? I have some questions about the loan documents you showed. Emmy, there was a pause. Of course, whatever you need to know. How about we meet at David's favorite restaurant? Marcel's downtown, 7 o'clock. That works. Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. I'm about to become a single mother, and I can't afford any more surprises. Kendall, you have my word. David was my best friend. I would never do anything to hurt you or the baby. After hanging up, I spent the afternoon going through David's personal effects one more time, looking for anything I might have missed. In the pocket of his jacket, the one he'd worn to work his final day, I found a small notebook with handwritten notes about Marcus's schemes. The entries were dated and detailed, showing how David had been documenting every conversation, every threat, every piece of evidence against Marcus. The final entry, written on the day of his death, read, "Meeting M tonight. Torres says this could be enough to put him away for life. If something happens to me, at least Kendall and baby will be safe. I love them both more than my own life." Agent Torres arrived at my house at 5 o'clock with a small technical team. They fitted me with the recording device and tested the audio quality multiple times. The wire was connected to a transmitter that would broadcast everything to FBI vehicles stationed around the restaurant. Mrs. Harper, we'll have agents inside the restaurant and others positioned outside. If you feel unsafe at any point, just say the phrase, "I need some air," and we'll move in immediately. What if Marcus realizes I'm wearing a wire? He won't, unless you give him reason to suspect. Act natural. Be the grieving widow who just wants answers about her husband's debts. Let him think he's manipulating you. As I drove to Marcel's, my baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing my stress. I talked to her quietly, promising that after tonight, we'd be safe. Your daddy loved you so much, sweetheart. He died protecting us, and now Mommy's going to make sure the bad man pays for what he did. Marcel's was busy for a Tuesday night, filled with couples and business dinners. I spotted Marcus immediately at a corner table, wearing an expensive suit and checking his phone. When he saw me, he stood and smiled warmly, playing the role of the concerned family friend perfectly. "Kendall, you look beautiful. How are you feeling? When's the baby due again?" 6 weeks, I said, settling into the chair across from him. "Marcus, I appreciate you meeting me. I've been going through David's papers, and I'm confused about some things. Of course, I know this is hard for you. David was always so secretive about money. He never wanted to worry you with financial stress." The waiter approached, but Marcus waved him away. "We're just having a quick conversation," he told the server, then turned back to me. "What specifically are you confused about?" "The loan documents you showed me." They're dated March 15th, but I found bank records showing David transferred money to you starting in February. $37,000 total. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. Those were advance payments against the larger loan. David was trying to help me through a difficult situation. What kind of situation required $50,000, Marcus? I thought your real estate business was doing well. Business has its ups and downs, Kendall. David understood that sometimes you have to take risks to succeed. Unfortunately, some of my investments didn't work out as planned. I pulled out copies of the bank statements. Marcus, I need you to help me understand something. If David already gave you $37,000, why are you claiming he still owes you $50,000? That would mean the total loan was $87,000. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he looked at the papers. For the first time since I'd known him, his friendly mask slipped completely. Kendall, you're asking a lot of complicated questions about a very simple situation, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. David borrowed money from me. He died before he could pay it back. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm owed the money. But Marcus, I found something else. I pulled out a copy of David's handwritten note from the safety deposit box, the one where he documented Marcus's threats. David wrote about conversations you had. He said you were blackmailing him. Marcus's face went completely still. He reached across the table and snatched the paper from my hands, his eyes scanning the words quickly. When he looked up, all pretense of friendship was gone. Where did you find this? David left it for me. Along with other things. Marcus, I know about the FBI investigation. I know about the fraud schemes. I know you killed my husband. The restaurant. Noise seemed to fade around us as Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. You have no idea what you're playing with, Kendall. David was weak. He couldn't handle the pressure of real business, so he ran crying to the FBI like a scared child. He was trying to stop you from hurting more people. Marcus laughed bitterly. Hurt people? I gave investors opportunities they never would have had otherwise. So, what if some of the projects didn't work out exactly as planned? That's business. David understood that until he got cold feet. You forged his signature on documents. You made it look like he was part of your schemes when he was innocent. Innocent? Marcus's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. David took money from me for months. He knew exactly what kind of business I was running. He just didn't want to get his hands dirty with the details. I realized Marcus was confessing without even knowing it. The wire hidden in my sweater was capturing every word. So you decided to kill him. I decided to solve a problem. David was going to destroy everything I'd worked for. He was going to send me to prison and ruin the lives of everyone connected to our business ventures. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my blood freeze. It was a picture of our house, taken from across the street. You know, Kendall, you live in a very nice neighborhood. Quiet streets, not much traffic. The kind of place where accidents can happen very easily. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You have two choices. You can accept that David owed me money and pay me what's rightfully mine. Or you can continue asking questions that put you and your baby in danger. I forced myself to stay calm, remembering Agent Torfey's instructions. Marcus, help me understand what happened the night David died. He was supposed to meet you, wasn't he? David called me that evening, said he wanted to discuss our situation. One more time. He was driving erratically when I found him on Maple Road, clearly upset, not paying attention to the road. You found him? I thought he was alone when the accident happened. Marcus realized his mistake immediately. His jaw tightened as he studied my face. I meant I heard about the accident afterward. Poor choice of words. The police said there was only one witness, a jogger. She didn't mention seeing anyone else. At the scene. Kendall, you're starting to sound like you don't trust me. That hurts. David and I were like brothers. Brothers don't usually kill each other for insurance money, Marcus. The silence stretched between us for long seconds. Around US, the restaurant continued its normal evening rhythm, but at our table the air crackled with tension. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it quickly before looking back at me with an expression I'd never seen before: cold, calculating, and completely without the warmth that had characterized our relationship for years. You know, Kendall, David made the same mistake you're making now. He thought he was smarter than me. He thought he could outsmart me with his FBI friends and his secret recordings. Marcus's admission about David's recordings sent a shock through my system that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the sudden, intense pain that gripped my abdomen. I gasped, my hand flying to my belly as the contraction hit, with surprising force. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, his threatening demeanor momentarily replaced by confusion. I think... Another contraction cut off my words, stronger than the first. "I think I'm in labor." The restaurant seemed to spin around me as I realized this wasn't false labor or Braxton Hicks contractions. My daughter was coming 6 weeks early, triggered by the stress and fear of the past few days. I fumbled for my phone, but Marcus's hand shut across the table to stop me. "Don't call anyone yet," he said, his voice urgent. "We need to finish our conversation first. Marcus, I'm having my baby. I need to get to the hospital. You need to listen to me very carefully, Kendall. Whatever recording devices the FBI gave you, whatever plans they made with you, it's over now. You're going to tell them you misunderstood our conversation, that I never threatened anyone." Another contraction hit, and I doubled over in pain. Through my distress, I managed to say the phrase Agent Torres had taught me: "I need some air." Within seconds, FBI agents appeared at our table as if materializing from thin air. Agent Torres herself was there, her hand on Marcus's shoulder before he could react. "Marcus Reed, you're under arrest for the murder of David Harper and multiple counts of fraud. This is harassment," Marcus protested as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "I was just having dinner with a family friend." "A family friend you just threatened and whose husband you murdered," Agent Torres replied calmly. "Mr. Reed, you have the right to remain silent." As Marcus was led away, still protesting his innocence, Agent Torres knelt beside my chair. "Mrs. Harper, how are you feeling? Do we need to get you to a hospital? The baby's coming," I gasped between contractions. "It's too early, but she's coming." The next few hours were a blur of sirens, hospital corridors, and medical staff rushing around me. Dr. Sarah Chen, my obstetrician, arrived within minutes of my admission and immediately began preparing for an emergency delivery. "Kendall, your daughter is eager to meet the world, but she's going to need some extra help. At 34 weeks, her lungs aren't fully developed yet, so we'll need to move her to the NICU immediately after birth. Is she going to be okay?" I asked through another contraction. Babies born at 34 weeks have excellent survival rates. She likely need to stay in the hospital for a few weeks, but with proper care, she should be fine. As I labored, Agent Torres remained in the hallway, coordinating with hospital security. Apparently, Marcus had made bail within hours of his arrest, his lawyer arguing that he posed no flight risk and that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence. The judge had set bail at $2 million, which Marcus had somehow managed to post. "Mrs. Harper," Agent Torres said during a brief break between contractions, "Marcus Reed is out on bail, but we have 24-hour surveillance on him. He won't be able to get near you or the hospital." "What about the recording? Did we get enough? More than enough?" "His confession about David's recordings, his threats against you, his admission about being at the accident scene. It's all there. Combined with the physical evidence and David's recordings, we have a solid case." At 11:47 p.m., my daughter entered the world weighing 4 pounds, 2 ounces. She was tiny but fierce, crying loudly as the medical team worked to stabilize her breathing. When they placed her on my chest for just a moment before taking her to the NICU, I saw David's eyes looking back at me. "Hello, Emma Grace," I whispered, using the name David and I had chosen together. Your daddy wanted so much to meet you. He died protecting us, and now you're here, safe and strong. The nurses wheeled Emma to the NICU, where she was placed in an incubator and connected to monitors that tracked her breathing and heart rate. She looked so small and vulnerable, but her vital signs were strong. Dr. Chen updated me on Emma's condition. She's doing remarkably well for 34 weeks. Her breathing is stable, and all her reflexes are normal. With luck, she'd be home in 4 to 6 weeks. As I settled into my hospital room, exhausted but relieved, Agent Torres brought me an update on Marcus's case. The recording from tonight gave us everything we needed. Marcus's lawyer is already talking about a plea bargain, but we're not interested. This case is going to trial. What happens now? Now you focus on getting better and taking care of your daughter. Marcus Reed will never hurt another family the way he hurt yours. Through my hospital room window, I could see the city lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably planning his next move, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Emma was safe. The truth was finally coming to light, and David's sacrifice had not been in vain. The NICU became my second home over the next 2 weeks. Every morning, I'd arrive with pumped breast milk and spend hours sitting beside Emma's incubator, reading to her from the children's books David had already started collecting. Her tiny fingers would curl around mine through the openings in the incubator, and I'd tell her stories about her father. Your daddy was the bravest man I ever knew, I whispered during one particularly quiet morning shift. He loved you before you were even born, and everything he did was to keep you safe. Emma's birth certificate had arrived the day before. Official. Documentation of her existence in a world that David would never see. But as I looked at the document, Emma Grace Harper, born October 15th, I felt his presence in the room. The middle name Grace had been his choice. After his grandmother who had raised him after his parents died, Dr. Chen was amazed by Emma's progress. She's exceeding all our expectations, she told me during morning rounds. Her breathing is completely stable now, she's gaining weight steadily, and her neurological development is right on track. This little girl is a fighter. She gets that from her father, I said, watching Emma sleep peacefully, despite the monitors and tubes surrounding her. Agent Torres visited me every few days with updates on Marcus's case. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but his expensive legal team was mounting an aggressive defense, claiming that all the recordings were taken out of context and that David's death was truly accidental. They're trying to paint Marcus as a victim of David's reckless business decisions, Agent Torres explained during one visit. His lawyers are arguing that David was a willing participant in the fraud schemes and that Marcus was just trying to recover money David owed him legitimately. But we have recordings of Marcus confessing to murder. We do, but his lawyers claim those statements were made under duress, that you were threatening him and he was just trying to protect himself. It's a weak defense, but expensive lawyers can make weak defenses sound convincing to juries. The thought of Marcus walking free made my stomach turn, but I tried to focus on the positive developments in my life. Emma was growing stronger every day, and I was learning to navigate the complex world of being a single mother. The nurses in the NICU had become like family, teaching me how to care for a premature baby and offering emotional support during the difficult moments. One afternoon, while Emma was sleeping, I sat in the hospital chapel and wrote a letter to David. I'd been thinking about him constantly since Emma's birth, wishing he could see how beautiful and strong our daughter was. David, she has your stubborn streak and your determination. The doctors say she's healing faster than they expected, just like you always did when you were sick. I wish you could hold her, could see her tiny perfect fingers and the way she grips mine when she's scared. I talk to her about you every day, and I swear she knows your voice when I read from the letters you wrote to her before she was born. I'd found those letters in David's desk drawer, a collection of notes he'd written to our unborn daughter during my pregnancy. They were filled with hopes and dreams, advice for growing up, and promises about the kind of father he planned to be. Emma's progress allowed her to be moved from the incubator to a regular crib by her third week of life. Holding her without the barrier of plastic and medical equipment was transformative. She felt so real, so present, so completely mine and David's. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," I told her as she nursed for the first time without supplemental feeding tubes. "Your daddy made sure we'd be taken care of, and now it's just you and me against the world." The financial stress I'd been worried about was lessening too. David's life insurance company had frozen Marcus's fraudulent claim and restored me as the primary beneficiary. The FBI had also helped me recover most of the money David had transferred to Marcus, which had been sitting in accounts Marcus couldn't access while under federal investigation. But more than the financial security, Emma's presence gave me emotional strength I didn't know I possessed. Every day she grew stronger was a victory over Marcus's attempt to destroy our family. Every milestone she reached was proof that love and determination could triumph over evil and manipulation. Dr. Chen approached me during evening rounds with news I'd been hoping to hear. "Kendall, Emma's ready to go home. All her tests are normal. She's maintaining her body temperature, and she's feeding well. If you're ready, we can discharge her tomorrow morning." As I looked down at my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms, I felt David's presence more strongly than ever. We'd made it through the darkest period of our lives, and now Emma and I were ready to begin building the future David had died protecting. 3 months after Emma's birth, Marcus Reed's trial began with a media circus that transformed the courthouse steps into a battlefield of cameras and reporters. I arrived with Emma in her carrier, flanked by Agent Torres and the federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chun, who had been building the case against Marcus for over a year. "Mrs. Harper, are you ready for this?" Prosecutor Chen asked as we walked through the courthouse security. "The defense is going to try to paint you as an unreliable witness motivated by grief and revenge." "I'm ready," I said, adjusting Emma's blanket as she slept peacefully despite the chaos around us. David deserves justice, and Emma deserves to grow up knowing her father was a hero, not a criminal. The courtroom was packed with Marcus's other victims, FBI agents, reporters, and David's former colleagues. Marcus sat at the defense table in an expensive seat, flanked by 3 lawyers who had been working around the clock to create reasonable doubt about his guilt. Patricia Williams called the court to order, and Prosecutor Chen began his opening statement with a timeline of Marcus's crimes that painted a clear picture of escalating fraud and desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about greed, manipulation, and ultimately murder. The defendant, Marcus Reed, spent 2 years running elaborate fraud schemes that stole over $2 million from innocent investors. When his best friend David Harper discovered these crimes and threatened to expose them, Marcus Reed made a calculated decision to commit murder. Marcus's lead attorney, Jonathan Blackwood, countered with a defense that attempted to shift blame to David. David Harper was not the innocent victim the prosecution wants you to believe. He was a willing participant in risky business ventures who got cold feet when those ventures failed. Marcus Reed is guilty of nothing more than trying to collect legitimate debts from a friend who betrayed his trust." The first week of testimony focused on Marcus's fraud schemes. FBI financial analysts explained how Marcus had created fake investment opportunities, forged documents, and used David's reputation to gain credibility with victims. One by one, Marcus's victims took the stand to describe how they'd been convinced to invest their life savings in projects that never existed. Eleanor Patterson, a retired teacher who had lost her entire pension to Marcus's schemes, testified with quiet dignity about how Marcus had promised her a secure investment that would supplement her retirement income. "He showed me documents with David Harper's name on them," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious pain. "I trusted Mr. Harper's reputation. I never would have invested if I'd known the documents were forged." The prosecution methodically built their case, showing how Marcus had used David's consulting firm as a front for legitimacy while stealing from investors. David's business partner, Tom Bradley, testified about David's increasing stress and his questions about asset protection. In the weeks before his death, David was scared, Tom told the jury. He'd discovered that someone was using his name and signature on documents he'd never seen. He was working with law enforcement to figure out who was responsible. Agent Torres took the stand on the fourth day of the trial, walking the jury through the FBI's investigation and David's role as a confidential informant. She played portions of David's recorded conversations with Marcus, including the chilling exchange where Marcus threatened to make David's death look like an accident. Marcus's lawyers objected repeatedly, claiming the recordings were taken out of context and that David had been entrapping their client. But as the jury listened to Marcus's voice detailing his plans to steal from David's life insurance policy, their expressions grew increasingly disturbed. The most devastating testimony came from Dr. Sarah Kim, the forensic expert who had re-examined the accident scene. Using detailed photographs and computer simulations, she explained how the physical evidence proved that David's car had been forced off the road by another vehicle. The paint transfer on Mr. Harper's vehicle matches the defendant's BMW, Dr. Kim testified. The angle and pattern of the damage is consistent with a deliberate ramming action, not an accidental collision. This was not a single vehicle accident, it was vehicular homicide. When it was my turn to testify, Emma was with David's parents in the courthouse nursery. Walking to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life, but I knew this was my chance to speak for David, to make sure the jury understood what kind of man he really was. Prosecutor Chen guided me through my testimony carefully, starting with our marriage and David's character, before moving to the events surrounding his death. I described finding the threatening text messages, discovering the fraudulent bank transfers, and ultimately learning about David's cooperation with the FBI. Mrs. Harper, did your husband ever mention being involved in any illegal business activities? Never. David was the most honest person I'd ever met. He paid his taxes early. He returned extra change when cashiers made mistakes. He wouldn't even jaywalk. The idea that he would participate in fraud schemes is completely contrary to everything I knew about him. Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, was aggressive during cross-examination, trying to suggest that I was an unreliable witness blinded by grief and motivated by money. Mrs. Harper, isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially from my client's conviction? Your husband's life insurance policy is worth $250,000. Mr. Blackwood, no amount of money is worth losing my husband. I would give every penny of that insurance money to have David back with our daughter. As I left the witness stand, I made eye contact with Marcus for the first time since that night at the restaurant. He stared at me with cold hatred, but I felt no fear. Emma and I had survived his worst, and now the truth was finally being told. The prosecution's final witness was Dr. Michael Torres, no relation to Agent Torres, a forensic psychologist who had analyzed Marcus's behavior patterns and the progression of his crimes. His testimony painted a chilling picture of a sociopathic personality who had escalated from financial fraud to murder when his schemes began unraveling. Mr. Reed exhibits classic narcissistic and antisocial personality traits, Dr. Torres explained to the jury. He shows no genuine remorse for his victims, demonstrates an inflated sense of his own importance, and is willing to harm others to achieve his goals. The escalation from fraud to murder is consistent with someone who views other people as objects to be manipulated, rather than human beings deserving of respect. When Marcus's defense team presented their case, they relied heavily on character. Witnesses who testified about Marcus's charm and generosity in his personal relationships. Former colleagues described him as helpful and trustworthy, while friends talked about his loyalty and kindness. But their strategy backfired when prosecutor Chen cross-examined these witnesses about their knowledge of Marcus's business dealings. None of them could explain the discrepancies in his financial records, and several admitted they had received expensive gifts or loans from Marcus that now seemed suspicious in retrospect. Marcus's ex-girlfriend, Amanda Walsh, was supposed to be a character witness for the defense, but her testimony took an unexpected turn when she revealed details about Marcus's behavior that contradicted his image as a caring friend. Marcus was charming, but he was also controlling, Amanda testified. He needed to know where I was at all times, and he became angry when I made decisions without consulting him first. Toward the end of our relationship, he started talking about people who had betrayed him and how they deserved what was coming to them. Did Mr. Reed ever mention David Harper specifically? Prosecutor Chen asked during cross-examination. Yes, in the months before we broke up. Marcus was obsessed with David. He talked about how David didn't appreciate everything Marcus had done for him, how David was ungrateful and selfish. Marcus said David needed to learn what loyalty meant. The defense's biggest mistake was putting Marcus on the stand to testify in his own defense. Mr. Blackwood had clearly coached him extensively, but Marcus's narcissistic personality made it impossible for him to maintain the facade of innocence. Under pressure, Prosecutor Chin methodically walked Marcus through the evidence, forcing him to explain the forged documents, the threatening messages, and the suspicious financial transactions. Marcus's answers became increasingly defensive and contradictory. Mr. Reed, can you explain why your BMW's paint was found on David Harper's vehicle if you weren't at the accident scene? I have no idea how that happened. Maybe someone borrowed my car, or maybe the police lab made a mistake. Are you suggesting that the FBI crime lab fabricated evidence against you? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that mistakes happen. When Prosecutor Chen played the recording of Marcus threatening me at the restaurant, Marcus's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. That conversation was taken completely out of context, Marcus insisted, his voice rising. Kendall was trying to trap me, to make me say things that weren't true. Mr. Reed, did you or did you not tell Mrs. Harper that David Harper's death looked like an accident? I was speaking hypothetically. I never said I caused any accident. Did you or did not tell Mrs. Harper that she and her baby could face similar accidents if she continued asking questions? That's not what I said. She's twisting my words. Prosecutor Chun then played the recording again, and Marcus's exact words filled the courtroom. You know, Kendall, you live in a very nice neighborhood. Quiet streets, not much traffic. The kind of place where accidents can happen very easily. Mr. Reed, how is that statement being taken out of context? Marcus's face flushed red with anger. She was trying to destroy my reputation, to blame me for David's death because she couldn't accept that he'd made bad business decisions. I was just trying to make her understand that pursuing this vendetta would only hurt her and the baby by threatening them with accidents. I never threatened anyone, Marcus shouted, causing Judge Williams to bang her gavel for order. The damage was done. The jury had seen Marcus's true personality: angry, defensive, and willing to lash out when cornered. His own words had convicted him more effectively than any evidence the prosecution could present. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Chun summarized the evidence with devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Reed is a man who spent 2 years stealing from innocent people, who manipulated and blackmailed his best friend, and who ultimately committed murder to cover up his crimes. The evidence is overwhelming, the motive is clear, and the defendant's own words confirm his guilt. Mr. Blackwood made a valiant effort to save his client, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that Marcus was being scapegoated for David's poor business judgment. But his words rang hollow after the jury had heard Marcus's own voice, making threats and confessing to crimes. As the jury left to deliberate, I sat in the courthouse hallway with Emma in my arms, finally allowing myself to hope that justice would be served. David's parents sat beside me, their faces reflecting the same mixture of exhaustion and anticipation that I felt. Whatever happens, David's mother said quietly, David would be proud of you for fighting for the truth. Emma stirred in my sleep, her tiny hand gripping my finger as if offering comfort. In 6 hours, the jury would return with their verdict, and Marcus Reed would learn the consequences of destroying an innocent family. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before Judge Williams called us back into the courtroom. Emma slept peacefully in her carrier beside me as the 12 men and women who would decide Marcus's fate filed back into the jury box. Their faces were solemn, giving no hint of their decision. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Williams asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stood slowly. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree. How do you find? We find the defendant guilty. The words hit me like a physical force, and I had to grip the bench in front of me to keep from collapsing with relief. Behind me, I heard David's mother sob quietly, while his father placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. On the charge of insurance fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering, how do you find? Guilty on all counts. Marcus's face remained impassive as the verdicts were read, but I saw his hands tremble slightly as the handcuffs were placed back on his wrists. His expensive lawyers exchanged grim looks, already planning their appeals strategy. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she addressed Marcus directly before dismissing the court. Mr. Reed, you have been convicted of heinous crimes that destroyed multiple families and ended an innocent man's life. The court will take the full extent of your callousness into consideration during sentencing. Outside the courthouse, Prosecutor Chun spoke to the gathered media while I held Emma close to my chest. Today, justice was served for David Harper and all of Marcus Reed's victims. This verdict sends a clear message that fraud, manipulation, and murder will not be tolerated in our community. Agent Torres approached me as the reporters dispersed. Mrs. Harper, how are you feeling? Relieved, I said honestly. But also sad. Nothing can bring David back or give Emma her father. This verdict doesn't fix what Marcus broke. No, but it ensures he can never hurt another family the way he hurt yours, and it validates everything David died trying to accomplish. 6 weeks later, I returned to the courthouse for Marcus's sentencing hearing. This time, I wasn't just a witness. I was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement directly to Marcus before Judge Williams imposed his sentence. Standing at the podium with Emma in my arms, I looked directly at the man who had destroyed my husband and nearly destroyed our family. Marcus stared back with the same cold indifference he'd shown throughout the trial. Marcus Reed, you killed my husband and robbed my daughter of her father. David was a good man who tried to help you when he thought you were in trouble, and you repaid his kindness by manipulating, blackmailing, and ultimately murdering him. I paused, gathering strength from Emma's warm weight against my chest. But you didn't win. David's love for his family was stronger than your greed. His courage in working with the FBI was stronger than your threats. And our daughter will grow up knowing that her father was a hero who died protecting the truth. You took David's life, but you couldn't destroy what he built. Emma and I are surrounded by people who love David and who support us now. We have financial security because of David's planning and sacrifice. We have each other, and we have hope for the future. I looked down at Emma, who was awake and alert, her dark eyes so much like David's. Most importantly, we have justice. David's death wasn't meaningless, and your crimes didn't go unpunished. The truth that David died trying to expose has been heard, and you will spend the rest of your life paying for what you did. Judge Williams listened attentively to my statement before addressing Marcus directly. Mr. Reed, your crimes represent a betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of human decency. You manipulated friendship, exploited good faith, and ultimately committed murder to cover your tracks. The court sentences you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for the murder of David Harper, plus an additional 40 years for fraud and racketeering charges. As Marcus was led away in chains, he turned back once to look at me, but instead of the hatred I expected to see, his expression was empty, the look of a man who had finally realized the full cost of his choices. Walking out of the courthouse for the final time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Emma gurgled happily in her carrier, reaching up to grab at the sunlight filtering through the courthouse steps. "It's over, sweetheart," I whispered to her. "Daddy can rest in peace now, and we can start building the life he wanted us to have." 1 year after Marcus's sentencing, I was cleaning out David's desk when I found a manila envelope hidden in the very back of the bottom drawer, behind files I'd already gone through multiple times. My hands shook as I opened it, wondering what other secrets David might have left behind. Inside were 9 handwritten letters, each one addressed to me and dated for different occasions. For Kendall on Emma's first birthday, for Kendall when Emma takes her first steps, for Kendall on our 5th wedding anniversary, and so on. The final letter was marked, "For Kendall when she's ready to love again." I sat on the floor of David's office with tears streaming down my face as I read the first letter. Dated for Emma's first birthday, which was just 2 weeks away. "My dearest Kendall, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to celebrate our daughter's first birthday with you. I hope you know how proud I am of the mother you've become, and how much I love watching you with Emma, even if I can only do it from afar now. I wrote these letters during the weeks when I knew Marcus was dangerous, when I realized I might not survive long enough to say all the things I wanted to tell you. I hope you never have to read them, but if you do, please know that every word comes from a heart that loves you and Emma more than life itself. Emma's first birthday should be a celebration, not a day of mourning. I want you to have a party. Invite our friends and family, and let our daughter see how much joy she brings to the world. Take pictures of her smashing her cake, record her laughing, and tell her that her daddy is watching every precious moment. Don't let my absence overshadow her milestones. She deserves to grow up knowing that she was wanted, planned for, and deeply loved from the moment we learned she existed. You are an amazing mother, Kendall, and I know you'll give her all the love and guidance she needs to become an incredible woman. Love you both more than words can express. Happy first birthday to our beautiful Emma Grace." The letter was signed with David's careful handwriting and included a small key taped to the bottom. The attached note read, "This opens a safety deposit box at Second National Bank, BOX 891. Inside is Emma's college fund, and some special gifts I wanted her to have. From me." Emma was napping when I drove to the bank, my emotions still raw from reading David's letter. The safety deposit box contained more than I could have imagined. A college savings account worth over $100,000. A collection of children's books with personal inscriptions from David to Emma, and a beautiful necklace that had belonged to David's grandmother, but the most precious item was a leather journal filled with David's thoughts and advice for Emma as she grew up. The first entry was dated the day we found out I was pregnant. "Today I learned I'm going to be a father. I've never been so scared or so excited about anything in my life. I want to be the kind of dad who's present for every moment, who listens more than he talks, and who shows his daughter how much she's worth by how he treats her mother. Emma Grace Harper, you are already so loved." Reading David's words felt like having a conversation with him across time. His hopes for Emma, his advice about handling difficult situations, his dreams about the woman she would become, it was all there, preserved in his careful handwriting for the day when Emma would be old enough to understand. That evening, as I fed Emma her dinner, I talked to her about her father in a way I never had before. Instead of focusing on the tragedy of his death, I told her about his excitement when we picked out her nursery furniture, his insistence on reading pregnancy books cover to cover, and his absolute certainty that she would be the most beautiful baby ever born. "Your daddy wrote you letters, Emma," I said as she babbled happily in her high chair. "He wanted to make sure you knew how much he loved you, even though he can't be here to tell you himself." Over the following weeks, I began planning Emma's first birthday party with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in months. I invited David's colleagues, our friends, both sets of grandparents, and even some of the FBI agents who had worked on Marcus's case. It would be a celebration of life, love, and the future David had died protecting. Agent Torres called me the week before the party with news about Marcus. "He's appealing his conviction. but his lawyers don't expect it to succeed. More importantly, several of his other victims have filed civil suits against his estate. The money you and Emma are entitled to from the restitution fund should be substantial. I don't need the money for revenge, I told her. But I want to make sure Emma has everything David planned to give her. Mrs. Harper, have you thought about what you want to do with your life now? I know David would want you to be happy and fulfilled. I looked at Emma, who was pulling herself up to standing against the coffee table, her face bright with determination and joy. I want to help other families who've been victimized by people like Marcus. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what we did. There are victim advocacy organizations that could use someone with your experience and passion, and your testimony in Marcus's trial was incredibly powerful. For the first time since David's death, I felt excited about the future. Emma and I had survived the worst that life could throw at us, and we were ready to build something meaningful. From the ashes of our tragedy, 2 years later, I stood in the conference room of the David Harper Foundation for Victim Advocacy, watching Emma toddle between the chairs while I prepared for our monthly board meeting. The foundation, funded by the restitution money from Marcus's conviction and David's life insurance policy, had already helped over 50 families navigate the aftermath of fraud and financial crimes. "Mama, up!" Emma demanded, raising her arms toward me with the imperious confidence of a 2-year-old who knew she was adored. Scooped her up just as Tom Bradley arrived for the meeting, his face bright with the kind of enthusiasm that had made him such a valuable board member. "Kendall, I have incredible news. The FBI wants to partner with us on a new program to help families of financial crime victims understand their legal rights." "That's wonderful, Tom. Agent Torres mentioned they were looking for civilian organizations to work with." Emma wiggled in my arms, wanting to explore the colorful children's area we'd set up in the corner of the conference room. Bringing her to board meetings wasn't conventional, but the foundation was built around the principle that families come first. And I wasn't going to apologize for being a working mother. As board members filtered in David's former colleagues, FBI agents and other crime victims who had become advocates, I felt David's presence in the room. This was exactly the kind of work he would have supported, using his death to prevent others from suffering the same loss. Dr. Sarah Chen, my former obstetrician who now served on our medical advisory board, arrived with exciting news about our latest initiative. The hospital has agreed to fund a family counselor position specifically for families dealing with trauma-related pregnancy complications. What you went through with Emma's premature birth shouldn't happen to other mothers. After the meeting, I sat in my office reviewing grant applications from families seeking help with legal fees and counseling services. Each application told a story of betrayal and financial devastation, but also of resilience and determination to rebuild. One application stood out: a young couple whose elderly parents had been defrauded out of their retirement savings by a scheme similar to Marcus's. The husband's letter reminded me so much of David's careful, concerned handwriting. "My wife is 8 months pregnant with our first child, and we're trying to help my parents recover from losing everything to a fake investment scam. We don't have money for lawyers, but we can't let the person who did this get away with destroying my parents' golden years. We need help fighting for justice." I immediately approved their application for emergency legal assistance funding. The David Harper Foundation would ensure they had the resources to pursue justice without sacrificing their own financial security. Emma had fallen asleep in her portable crib in the corner of my office when Agent Torres called with an update. "I've been hoping to hear for months. Kendall, Marcus Reed's appeal was denied. The conviction stands and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. It's officially over. Thank you for letting me know, Rebecca. How are you feeling about closing this chapter?" "Relieved and proud of what you've built with the foundation. David's death wasn't in vain. You've turned his sacrifice into something that's helping countless families." That evening, I carried sleeping Emma into the nursery. David had so carefully prepared for her arrival. The room had evolved over the past 2 years, filled now with books, toys, and photographs of Emma with both sets of grandparents who doted on her endlessly. I pulled out the leather journal David had left for Emma and added my own entry, something I'd been doing regularly since finding his letters. Emma is 2 years old today, and she's everything your father hoped she would be: curious, brave, determined, and absolutely fearless in the face of new challenges. She said "Dada" for the first time last week while looking at your photograph. And I know somehow you heard her. The foundation is thriving, helping families who've been hurt the way we were hurt. Every family we help, every person who finds justice, because of our work, is a testament to your courage and sacrifice. Emma will grow up knowing that her father's death meant something important, that it made the world a little bit safer for other families. I'm ready to read her your letters now, to tell her the full story of what happened and why you're not here. She's old enough to understand that Daddy was a hero, and old enough to know that heroes sometimes have to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect the people they love. I looked down at Emma, peaceful in her crib with her father's dark hair and determined chin. Tomorrow I would start telling her the real story of David Harper, not just the tragic ending, but the beautiful beginning and middle, the love story that created her, and the bravery that saved her. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, something I've been planning to do for months. Hi, Emma, this is Mommy, and I'm making this recording on your 2nd birthday so that someday, when you're older, you'll know the whole truth about your daddy and what happened to our family. Your father was the best man I ever knew, and everything he did was motivated by love for us. The man who hurt our family is gone now, and he can never hurt anyone else again. We survived, sweetheart, and we built something beautiful from the ashes of our tragedy. You are your father's greatest legacy. Emma Grace Harper, and I promise, you'll grow up knowing exactly how much you were loved, how much you were wanted, and how proud your daddy would be of the strong, brave little girl you're becoming. Outside Emma's window, the city lights twinkled like stars, full of promise for tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. David's love had protected us through the darkest time of our lives. And now that love would guide us into a future filled with hope, purpose, and the knowledge that truth and justice had finally prevailed, the story that began with betrayal and murder had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. Emma and I were ready for whatever came next, protected by David's memory and strengthened by the truth we'd fought so hard to reveal.